Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me today. And my name is Rich, or WatchBiao on social media.
So could you tell us about the watches you brought today?
So today I brought a Vacheron Constantin 222. This is the new version that they released 2 years ago on 2022.
Oh.
So 222.
Yeah,
right?
Interesting.
So this new version looks almost exactly like the original version from 1977. So it's a remake. The size, the shape is the same. The new version is in yellow gold, but I think it's interesting that they used a 3N gold color instead of a traditional 2N. That's the traditional yellow gold color. So when you look closely, this gold looks a little bit rosier than traditional yellow gold, such as like Rolex yellow gold. The dial is kind of like an off yellow, beigey color. So even though it's gold, it's a little bit different color than other gold watches out there. And I just love this bracelet because it's very smooth, it's round. The hexagon links kind of remind me of like the belly of a python snake. Which, when you put it on your wrist, it's a very cool design.
So, what's your collecting style right now? Modern or vintage or indie or mainstream?
I would say more modern. I have owned some vintage watches in the past, but I think for my style, my lifestyle, modern fits me better. I have when you own a vintage watch, if the condition is too nice, you're sometimes afraid.
Too nice, huh?
Yeah, if it's too nice, you're afraid to scratch it up or bang it because it's so precious or it might lose some value. And it's also more fragile, right? It's not as solid and robust. So I think I would worry more about a nice vintage watch, but a modern watch is more reliable, easier to wear. And I think I'm actually more intellectually stimulated by modern watches. It's kind of fascinating to think about which are the best watches made today. You know, there's different categories or different criteria you can look at. Quality, accuracy, finishing, design. But with vintage watches, everyone kind of already knows which were the best or coolest, most desirable vintage watches in the past. So we already have a consensus on that. But modern watches, the best watches that are made today in this era, there's a nice debate going on. And I think it's fun to kind of debate.
So what brands are in your current lineup and what's on your radar in the future?
So currently, I probably own more of the big brands like Rolex, AP, Patek. I think this is probably a result of recently I like to buy watches that I can share with my wife.
Oh, your wife?
Yes, and thankfully she likes larger watches. So she's a pretty normal sized female wrist, so much smaller than mine, but she likes to wear watches that are slightly oversized for her. So 40 millimeters is her preferred size. So we can share watches like Daytonas, Royal Oaks, things like that. And so these are more sentimental pieces to us because it has more of a personal personal connection. But you know, I'm also fascinated by high horology and movements. So along with the big brands, I've also owned probably at least one or two pieces from most of the big brands, as well as some smaller independents, MB&F, De Bethune, FP Journe, and so forth, and micro brands too.
Oh, micro brands too. So it's not a couple watch.
Yeah.
You share watch. Yeah, so if you have to pick one watch from your collection to represent your passion for watch collecting, which one would be and why?
Well, one is kind of tough. I would say a more recent acquisition, a Patek Philippe 5172G with a Tiffany stamped dial. I think, I was born in Taiwan, but I grew up in New York. I'm a New Yorker. And that Patek has a Tiffany stamped dial. And Tiffany is it's a New York institution. It's a very New York thing, right? During the holidays, when people go shopping on Fifth Avenue, we walk down and see the big Tiffany store. It's iconic, and it just so happens to be that Tiffany also sells Patek. So it's almost like a local New York limited edition when you can get a Patek with a Tiffany dial on it. And so it kind of represents this time in our lives where she has her own Tiffany Patek chronograph and I have my own. And so that's a couple's watch, but it also reminds us of New York. So I would say I've always been fascinated by independent brands. Even going back 20 years ago in the 2000s, I would read about them on the Purist Forum, where it seemed like it was a lot of collectors from certain regions, like maybe Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore.
That had the courage, the guts to really buy these new brands at the time. Right? Because at the time, MB&F was new, Urwerk was new, De Bethune was new, even Philippe Dufour was relatively new and wasn't as coveted as today, wasn't as well known. So I think they were kind of exotic at the time, right? And we were fascinated by those designs because you've never seen watches that look like that before. So, but the problem is, first of all, throughout those years, they were hard to get. They were hard to, and I'm the type of person that I like to see a watch, wear a watch first before pulling the trigger, before I actually buy. So it was very difficult to get hands-on with a lot of these independent watches. And then over time, I had the opportunity to test them more, to wear them, to get exposed to them, to try them. But then you start worrying about maybe value retention, because if you, at the time, you buy an independent watch, and if one day you had to sell it again, it's very challenging to find a buyer who wanted that watch as well, and B, get most of or any of your money back, right? Resale value was a problem. The market liquidity was a problem. And I was younger at the time. I appreciated these watches, but I didn't have the guts to buy them myself. So I think during COVID is when things changed, where a lot of watch collectors were just sitting at home and couldn't go out, and all you could do was buy watches online. So. And values were shooting up, so there was almost no risk. So you could buy anything that you wanted, and you probably, wouldn't lose anything. There was no downsides. So that's when I started buying more of the crazier designs. MB&F LM101 that I've always wanted. I wanted that watch for a long time, even before COVID. I thought it was the most wearable, piece that Max has designed. But it's still very, very striking in person, the design with the flying balance wheel. And then I purchased a De Bethune DB28 kind of blue. Blue is my favorite color, and that's the bluest watch that you can probably find anywhere. And it's mirror polished titanium that they flame heat until it turns blue. And the hard thing about that watch is trying to get every component heated up to the same amount of time or same temperature to appear like it's the same uniform color of blue. So it takes a lot of work to produce that piece. And that piece looks very unique, like nothing else, in the industry. So I really enjoyed pieces like that.
Yeah, things change. Collecting is a journey. Have you ever encountered any collector who had a significant impact on you? And what have you learned from them?
Yeah, collecting is definitely a long journey, and taste can change. So, for example, there's a lot of other collectors in New York who have also been collecting for 10, 20, 30 years and have seen tastes and trends change. So, for example, I have a friend in New York, JB, and he was into Panerai at the time, during the 2000s, and then he was early into independence, and he has a really good eye for trends, and he has good taste. I also, get a lot of good feedback from my friend Zach Attack. He is a Patek Philippe, very hardcore collector into the history of Patek, and I've learned a lot about the brand from him and the importance of complications about the brand, not just design, So for example, some people only collect different designs, simple watches, Calatravas, but he really emphasizes the more complicated models and the more rare models. That is kind of the hallmark of the brand. And I think lastly, I get a lot of feedback from my wife, because she is more knowledgeable about fashion and style than I am. And my taste has definitely changed over the years due to her impact.
If you had a time machine and could go back to when you first started collecting, so what advice would you give yourself, especially about how to start a collection?
So I think when I was young, some mistakes or things that I had to go through where I thought I wanted to build a large collection immediately, where I had to check off certain boxes. For example, I thought, I need a sports watch and a dress watch, right? Or I need a diving watch and I need a pilot watch. And I need a driving watch, a chronograph or something. And I've learned that over time, you don't need a little bit of everything. So you don't need to go through every genre, every category, because at the end, you start to realize that you usually only like certain things, certain categories or certain types of watches. So for example, in my 20s, I bought a few dressy watches, and I never really wore them because I didn't have many opportunities to dress up. Maybe I go to a wedding or something every 3 times a year or something. Yeah. So I only wore a formal watch, a formal dress watch 3 times a year. And over time I thought, oh yeah, that's kind of a waste, So if I'm more casual, more sporty, then I should probably, look and focus more on sportier casual watches.
My last question, with the rising of social media platforms like Instagram, do you think it's beneficial for the watch industry? And what future trends do you foresee from your perspective in New York?
Yeah, the rise of social media, I think it's good and bad. The good being that, it's easier to learn about different watches because you can find information about almost every watch, any watch online now. You can see pictures, you can see videos, you can find people talking about them, describing them. So it's much easier to research different watches, and that accessibility brings a lot more new collectors into the hobby as well. So that's a positive thing, but at the same time, if everyone likes the watch that you like, maybe it's more difficult to get that watch for you. And everyone liking the same thing is not, it's not always the best thing. right? It can be a little bit boring. It used to be very interesting where you go to a different region and find kind of localized taste, right? See that less and less, where everyone kind of knows about or likes similar things. So maybe it's not as fun and interesting as before.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Rich.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Eric.